Plant-based milks. They've been around for a while now, and I've been recommending it to patients since the last millennium. Now, there is recent research that was presented at the annual meeting for the American Society of Nutrition that looks at how these milky liquids stack up. So let's talk about it. Hey everybody, it's Dr. David. So for some of these videos that I do quite a bit of research on in order to present to you the information the best that I can figure out at the time. Now, this happens to be one that I really did not need to do any research on whatsoever. I've been on the forefront of talking about plant-based alternatives and concerns about dairy for a very long time. Now, my story for this actually goes back to 1995 when I was a resident at Tampa General Hospital. Now, we had the amazing honor of having Dr. Frank Oski, who is really considered one of the forefathers of modern pediatrics, came to Tampa General and gave a grand rounds lecture. And at these lectures, they'll go in there, very distinguished people will present either their cutting edge research or their thoughts, their experiences in pediatrics through the years. And, if you're a pediatrician, you probably know Dr. Frank Oski. He literally wrote the textbook on pediatrics, the Oski textbook. Okay. He also was the past president of the Academy of Pediatrics. So, certainly not a rogue individual here. And he was a huge advocate for breastfeeding. This tops. Okay. He taught us in that lecture also so many facts about the wonders of breast milk, facts that I continue to quote on a very regular basis now. Now, one of the things he explained was that after infancy, human beings do not need milk. They need the nutrients that are found in milk. He pointed out to us that humans are the only mammal that drinks another animal's milk. And we are also the only mammal that drink milk at all once we've been weaned, maybe with the exception of domesticated cats if they're being given it by their owner, but that's really kind of not a thing much anymore now either. Okay. Now, I went out and promptly bought his book, which was called Don't Drink Your Milk, with the subtitle, Frightening Medical Facts About the World's Most Overrated Nutrients. Okay. Yeah. Frightening medical facts. Now, did I happen to mention about this guy who's bucking the medical establishment, was also the director of pediatrics at Johns Hopkins University? A totally rogue individual, right? Dr. Oski, along with Dr. Louis Barnes, who started Tampa General Pediatrics and was actually the mentor for Dr. Oski, they really were two of the most influential people on my early career, giving me the comfort to talk about these types of things, to look outside the box, to not accept the dogma that is necessarily presented to us as fact. And God bless them both. Rest in peace. I owe a great deal of thanks to both of them. Okay. Now, fast forward to 1997, a couple more years, where I saw my first patient with autism as an outpatient pediatrician. And this mom she had heard about how dairy-free, in particular casein-free, as well as gluten-free diets were helping some kids with autism, and asked if I can help her figure out how to do that safely while making sure that we're not missing out on any nutrients. And of course, I jumped at the opportunity for that to really do a deep dive in order to really be able to help out. Because of course, I wanted to make sure that we weren't going to miss anything by doing this. Okay. Lots of improvements we're seeing with this kid. This is really, the first biomedical intervention that I did. And it was definitely, again, set me on my path. Okay. Now, since then, I have absolutely learned about a whole bunch of other medical conditions where there could be benefit from the avoidance of dairy, of cow milk protein, lactose, all types of things. So there's lots of ingredients in there, right? Lots of constituents. So let's talk a little bit more about what I've learned since then. Okay. So now overall, no doubt, milk is a good source of lots of nutrition besides calcium, water, vitamin D, protein, fat. So there's a lot packed into this one substance, and certainly why the Academy of Pediatrics have talked about taking these. But again, it's the nutrients within it. It's not necessarily the package. That's the important thing here, okay? But all of those things are absolutely critical for child development and growth, right? So we need to make sure that the nutrients are being consumed. But there are lots of ways to get these nutrients. So you want to make sure that it's all there. If you're going in this path for your child or for yourself, make sure that you're researching from reliable sources. Work with a healthcare provider who knows what they're talking about, who knows how to figure out what the particular needs are for the individual. Dairy milk can be added to a bad diet as well as to a good diet, depending on what else is in there, and if it's being done as milkshakes and with lots of chocolate syrup too. So again, understand what is going into the body. Really simple. Okay. Now, in terms of other health concerns, where of course, when we're talking about what we consume, we're always talking about whatever goes into our body, what are the pros versus the cons. So, of course, the benefits are all of these nutrients. But we know about allergies, inflammation, milk protein intolerance, eczema, asthma. All types of what we refer to as atopic conditions could be triggered by dairy. And certainly, when I see a patient, if they're consuming those types of foods, that is certainly one of the first things I'm going to consider suggesting that it be avoided and see if there's a clinical difference. But we know also about long-term saturated fat and the relationship with heart disease, the cow milk protein intolerance itself. So besides lactose intolerance, casein, also whey, are the proteins. You don't have an allergic reaction to lactose. You can't break it down enzymatically, and that's what causes GI issues. But with the casein and gluten, the casein and the whey, you can actually have antibodies that are attacking it to cause allergic reactions. Okay. Now, also, there could be contaminants in it, especially depending on how clean the source is. And we know that there could be growth hormones and other things in milk. Although, thankfully, that those are reducing. We are seeing less of that in the products because consumers have stood up and said we don't want that in our milk. Just like antibiotics, you mostly will see that the cows were not being given antibiotics, but there are still out there. Know your source. Okay. Now, how much person does a calcium need? Let's start with calcium because that's kind of like the biggie that people first start thinking about. Most people actually need 600 to 800 milligrams a day. The recommended daily allowance is higher. The CDC and the FDA say more than that. But there's a lot of other information that says that that's not true. Now, during times of growth spurts, pregnancy, lactation, some other medical conditions, more may be needed, 1,000 even up to 1,200. But also, if you have a really nice vitamin D level above 50, you don't need as much calcium because you're going to absorb it better. Okay. And of course, there are some kids that sometimes you hear they're drinking 4 to 6 cups of milk a day. That's probably too much calcium for them. That's the heavy load for the kidneys to have to deal with. You're not going to be able to store it all. So, you don't want to overdo calcium either. Okay. Now, of course, in order to absorb it, as I mentioned, you need to have good vitamin D to let that absorption happen. There does need to be magnesium. Parathyroid hormone has to be in play there as well. But the body does absorb calcium more efficiently when vitamin D is there. Higher vitamin D therefore means lower. So there's a direct relationship with how much you need. Okay. Now, just like one can check a calcium level, now, you don't do a serum calcium level that's on a typical liver and kidney profile because that's telling you how your body is regulating calcium to keep the blood level a certain place. But it's called an ionized calcium, and that actually tells you more about the full body calcium. But of course, there are vitamin D levels, and the test to do for vitamin D is 25 hydroxy vitamin D. Okay, and any lab can run this. Okay, and as I said, I like to get all people also from an immunological perspective above 50. Although probably a level of above 30, 32 is enough for calcium absorption. But again, if you get up to 50, you don't need as much. Now, if you're not sure if enough calcium is being consumed, I suggest keep a 3-day food log. Put the liquids in there, put the as well as other foods. There are a lot of other foods that do have calcium in it. But utilize package labels. Okay. Keep a list, keep an actual log. There is a website that I use a lot called myfooddata.com. And you'll see that there's in the tools section, you'll see you can put any food that you want in there. It'll create a label for you. You can even you're putting in a cup, 2 cups, an ounce or whatever, and it automatically changes the label. So, based upon that particular consumption, how much is actually in there. Okay. Now, in terms of this new research that was put forth by the American Society of Nutrition, none of this shocked me because I've been looking at milk and alternative milk labels forever. Okay. But they looked at 233 different plant-based milks from 23 different companies. Okay. And what they found, so Abigail Johnson, she is the author, the head researcher of this. She's the one who made the presentation at the annual meeting. And what she had reported was about half of the products relative to regular milk, only about half of them had had the vitamin D fortification. Two-thirds of them had fortification with calcium. Some of them have almost none. And that nearly 20% of them had protein levels that were similar to cow milk. So there are some deficiencies there, but there are products out there. So you have to read the labels. You have to know what you're doing. You have to work with somebody who knows the stuff. Okay. Now, there were some other interesting findings. 28% of the beverages did have it. I'm sorry, not 28%. 20 of the beverages had at least as much calcium and vitamin and protein as cow milk. So about but that's only a little more than 10% that had it all. Okay. But again, you don't have to have equal amounts for everything because depending on what else is consumed in the diet, there's lots of other ways that we're getting fluid, i.e., water. There's lots of other ways we're getting protein, right? So it's the calcium we got to be a little bit more cautious of in terms of you're getting it. I've seen products personally that have as little 4% calcium, others that have 50% calcium. So again, you need to know. Now, also, look to see some of them naturally have more protein in it. Some of these plant-based milks, they have added protein as well. So again, look at those labels. Now, one of the things that that the author had did, and she was from the is from the University of Minnesota School of Public Health Nutrition Coordination Center. I'm really happy that she made this statement, though. I'm not seriously concerned about this, as it is easy to get these nutrients from other sources, and cow milk certainly isn't perfect and infallible, which is what I just talked about for the last 5 minutes. But it is certainly nice to know that this is kind of becoming a mainstream concept now, that milk isn't at all, and there's lots of other ways of getting it, right? So you got to get it. But what are some of the other benefits of plant based milk? Number one, it's cholesterol free. It's from a plant. It's not from an animal. There's milk and cholesterol. People who have problems, whether it's familial hypercholesterolemia or people who have high cholesterol issues, and it can happen in kids too, let alone adults. So obviously, the decreased consumption of animal products, including milk, will reduce that. Okay. Now, they do also have levels of saturated fat. Okay. But of course, it depends on whether it's whole milk 2% or skim, because obviously skim doesn't have any fat. But saturated fat is, of course, different than unsaturated fat. You know, we know that too much saturated fat is an issue in terms of cardiovascular health. Some of these plant based milks also do have some added fiber. Okay, and again, you got to check the label for this. But of course, you know, there may be some kids who are a little bit picky, and you know, typically a child should take the amount of fiber that's however old they are plus 5, and adults need to be taking increasing more into the 30s and 40s, depending male, female, age, etc. So potentially another source of fiber. That's kind of cool. Okay, so overall, what's my take on this? So first of all, you can absolutely do great with a plant-based milks, okay? But do pay attention to the sugar, because you'll see that they're both unsweetened as well as sweetened forms, and some of the sweetened forms are also added flavoring, so there could be even more. So look at those labels, because you might not realize how much added sugar is going on in these products. And of course, we do try to avoid added sugar. Lactose is not added sugar. It's a milk sugar. It's still sugar, but it is kind of looked a little bit differently, okay? Now, from a health perspective, that's why I haven't been a fan of cow milk for all along. People who follow plant-based diets, okay? Veganism obviously being the ultimate plant-based diet. Some other people do plant-based diets where they'll allow 15%, maybe 3 meals a week that have animal products in it or dairy or whatever, and then be vegan the rest of the time. So of course, these are essential types of products or nutrients to make sure that they're there. Okay. Now there are people who do fine with dairy, so it's not like it's a terrible thing for all people. If you do fine with it, it's a great source of nutrition. If your gut's fine, no allergies, etc., hey, keep on drinking it. Of course, we'd rather it be organic milk. With kids, also they do have the ones that have the added omega-3 fatty acids, which can be helpful, kind of making it a little more like breast milk is. But it's not like everybody needs to. But I would say if you got anything chronic going on, you may want to kind of look to this as a potential trigger. Okay. And of course, assessing those needs individually. And of course, that can change over time. Not just because of age, but what else is going on in the diet. So, a kid may not be consuming enough protein now, but they are later, etc., from other foods in their diet. So you got to look at that. Okay. Now, also do watch for hidden dairy. Sometimes it doesn't necessarily say milk right on the label. Sometimes it'll say, butter fat, or it may say milk solids or caseins or caseinates, etc. And so look for that lactose. Now, there are products that actually contain lactose, but there's no other dairy protein in there. So again, you may have to dig a little deeper for that as well. Um, now, of course, look on the package label, because since it does say may contain milk, products, and of course that will let you know as well. So hopefully you knew a lot about this already. But nonetheless, now you know more. Have a great day.